Is Iowa the victim of NIL, or is the decommitment of Olando Trader just the result of a young man still learning what decisions to make in life? More on the decommitment from class of 22 DB Olando Trader in a moment. But first, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor for this show, Josue Alvarez down at Dewey Ford. If you need a vehicle, new or used, call Josue 515-776-1068. He will treat you better. And if you buy a new or used car and you mention that From the Hawkeye of the Storm sent you, you will get a $100 gas card. How about that deal from Josue Alvarez at 515-776-1068? You can find him down at Dewey Ford in Ankeny. So thank you, Josue, once again for jumping on. The news on this Wednesday, class of 22 DB Olando Trader decommitting from the class of 22. This was an unexpected move. I didn't hear any rumblings of something like this happening. You don't expect it, certainly after a kid signs. Keep in mind, he is signed. He signed back in December during the early period. So I'll read you the announcement, and I'll throw it up here on the screen as well. This is officially from Olando Trader's Twitter. He tweeted out this morning, Iowa has always been a place that I called home. The coaches were amazing. The environment was live, and the players were great to be around. After many conversations and decisions, I have decided to open my recruitment up to find where I can be the most successful and better myself as a student athlete. I am decommitting from Iowa, and my recruitment is 100% open at this time. Respect the decision. Okay, so what to make of this? If you don't know who Olando Trader is, I'll give you a quick background of Trader. He was a late flip for Iowa, was originally committed to Central Michigan. He and Cohen and Tringer both defensive backs, part of that tandem of four that Iowa nailed in the early period. Of course, Deshaun Lee committed later on, signed earlier this year. But you had TJ Hall, Xavier Wampa, Cohen and Tringer, and Trader. So Trader and Tringer were flips from Central Michigan. Trader, considered by most sites to be a three-star recruit. According to Rivals, he had offers from Central and Eastern Michigans, Nebraska, and Vanderbilt. So a couple other Power 5 offers in there. But he was committed to Central Michigan for around 6 months. I found it interesting. I'm not trying to dissect or criticize the comment that Trader made in his statement here, where he says Iowa has always been a place I called home. I wonder that a little bit because he was committed to Central Michigan, but that's beside the point. He is a Michigan kid. Would not be shocked to see him play at Central or Eastern Michigan. Now the question is he able to get a release from his national letter of intent? Because he signed that. So, he says he uses the term decommitting. It's more than just decommitting because he signed his national letter of intent. That's the whole point of the letter of intent. It's not just so simple as, well, I'm decommitting and going somewhere else. So either he gets a release, which I'm assuming he already has, unless this is just a premature statement that he released. Either he gets that national letter of or I should say a release from his national letter of intent, or he's going to have to enter the transfer portal. And if he does that and he wants to play right away, you're looking at having to utilize that one-time transfer rule. Now, what's not completely ironed out, or at least that I'm not totally sure on, is if he's able to go somewhere else via the transfer portal and basically waive his right to that automatic eligibility and say, I want to save that. Because if he uses that now, then he's not able to use that per the current rule. He's not able to be immediately eligible if he transfers in the future. That's a pretty big deal right now for kids. Kids are late. You see some kids playing for 2, 3, 4 schools. Certainly Trader hasn't even gotten onto a campus yet. For him to have already used that one-time transfer exception, or exemption, I should say, would be a pretty big deal. So I don't know exactly how that's going to transpire. But again, if he's able to waive that and say, I'm willing to sit out a year, it's his true freshman year anyways. Likely he wouldn't get much time regardless of where he goes, would be my guess. So that might be wise. But he may just get a release from Iowa and he's able to go somewhere and not have to enter the portal. So the question is, does this mean that Iowa was a victim? I saw this on Twitter and on the message boards already today. Does this mean Iowa is a victim of NIL? Is this just another example of Iowa being a victim of NIL? Because we've seen this with basketball, with the big men, specifically Fardaws Aimaq, Theo Akuba, Trey Mitchell, these guys that are not even visiting Iowa. And my understanding is it's because Iowa has had nothing to offer in the way of a collective or NIL money in general. And whether I always say this too, whether you like NIL and how it's set up right now as it is what it is. It's in place now and Iowa's behind. That's a fact. They are behind. Don't care what Gary Barta says on it. They're behind because other schools have collectives in place. They're utilizing them. That's just part of the game right now. Whether that changes or not, we'll see. It's part of the game right now. But here's the deal. The question here on the screen, is Iowa a victim of NIL as it relates to Trader's decision to leave? And first of all, I'll get to this in a moment. I don't think this is a huge blow. I mean, I know people were high on Trader and that group of 4 guys, but if it just stays Trader, I'm assuming Cohen and Tringer, I'm guessing those 2 guys maybe were close because they both were Central Michigan commits. They both flipped to Iowa. Assuming it's just Trader, there's not going to be a domino effect here. Not the end of the world. Not a huge deal. It's a very deep position. I'll get to that in a moment. But I'm never going to say, at least at this point, I'm not going to say that Iowa is a victim of NIL because Iowa has had the opportunity to implement a collective, and they've chosen to wait and take their sweet time. And I'm talking about Gary Barta. I'm talking about the administration. And whether you agree with Gary Barta or not, that's a fact. They don't have it in place. He's admitted as much. He continues to say they'll have it by summer. I doubt this was the reason Olando Trader is leaving. I don't see a 3-star recruit who had, again, offers from Central Michigan, Eastern Michigan, Nebraska, and Vanderbilt deciding before he ever gets to campus, hey, I want to leave because I want to go somewhere where there's better NIL incentives. Now, maybe that's part of it. But the fact that he's already here, I would think that you would wait to see, what's that collective going to look like once it's here. I just doubt that he's being offered thousands of dollars to go somewhere else. I seriously doubt that. So I don't think that's fair to anyone. But again, even if it was the case, even if Trader left because of NIL money, I'm not going to call Iowa a victim. They've put themselves in this position. That's the first thing. So the question is, where does Iowa stand now as it relates to the 2022 class? They've got the 4 defensive backs, really, with Deshaun Lee, Xavier Wampa, Cohen and Tringer, and TJ Hall. The thing about it is you saw Trader flip from Central Michigan to Iowa. So sometimes young men at that age don't know what they want in life. That's normal, right? That's part of just growing up and learning how to make decisions. We've seen kids across the country make multiple transfers, mentioned that earlier. But the fact that Trader already had decommitted from Central Michigan, flipped to Iowa on signing day, it's not terribly surprising that this would be a young man who changes his mind again. And so that's the only reason why I would even question Conan Tringer. Hopefully he's all in right now. TJ Hall's a perfect example. I don't think there's any chance in this world, on this earth, that he leaves anytime soon. Now, you never know down the road, but TJ Hall was previously committed to Arizona, previously committed to Washington, but the circumstances with TJ were different. We know the connections with Don Patterson, who his dad was and whatnot. He's here, he's locked in, and if you know kind of the circumstances behind his commitments at the time when he committed to Arizona and Washington, you'd realize that he's solid here. So I'm not shocked by this. I think the class is fine. Okay. You look at the group of defensive backs on this roster right now. We know the household names: Terry Roberts, Riley Moss, Jamari Harris. Certainly, we mentioned Xavier Wampa. Sebastian Castro is going to factor in probably at safety or cash. Quinn Schulte is a walk-on. It sounds like he's really projected to factor in at safety. And then as it relates to cornerback, because that's probably where his future lie was at cornerback. Again, Deshaun Lee, you've got Brennan Diaz-Fernandez. You've got Moss, Roberts, AJ Lawson is another guy who he'll be a sophomore this year. I would expect him to factor in at some point. I think they're okay there. TJ Hall, I think they're okay at cornerback. It does thin things out a little bit. That again, I still think that defensive back is Iowa's deepest position collectively between safety and corner. But this does hurt. Reggie Bracey is another guy that I missed. So I think they'll be okay there. We'll see what Iowa does. I know they're recruiting a number of defensive backs in the coming months. They've already got some athletes for 23. We mentioned Aiden Hall, who's likely either a linebacker or safety. Mentioned him on a video earlier this week. And they'll be fine. They do a good job. Phil Parker does a good job identifying cornerback talent, defensive back talent. They'll be okay at that position. Kayvon Merriweather's another one. Of course, he's not a corner, but he is a safety. He'll be there this year. So I don't think it's going to affect things in the short term. And I do think this is just part of, even though we'll have to wait and see. I don't think Trader is going to end up in the transfer portal. I think he'd probably just get a release from his letter. This is just a result of where we're at. There's going to be more and more of these things happening, whether that be transfer portal decisions, decommitments before signing day, or in this case, a decommitment after signing day and request for a release from your national letter. That's just the day and age we live in. It's always been the case where kids decide to change their minds, but it's just going to be more prevalent now with everything, not just NIL, not just with the transfer portal, but a collection of everything. So I think they'll be okay. We'll just wait and see what happens on the recruiting front. But of course, any updates on the recruiting front, you'll be able to find right here from the Hawkeye of the Storm. So if you haven't already done so, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe, turn notifications on. Stay tuned because the release of our podcast, Brad has Branded Thoughts, will be later this week, right here at From the Hawkeye of the Storm, plus post-game coverage during the Big Ten baseball tournament. So get it locked in right here. We'll have a first post-game after round 1 against Penn State.